I never thought a tomato plant could start a war, but that was before I saw the envelope taped to our backyard gate. It was official-looking, white with bold red letters that screamed notice of violation. I yanked it off, confused, thinking maybe it was for a neighbor, but no, it was addressed to us, right there in black and white. Violation of HOA Code Section 12.4, unauthorized cultivation of edible plants. Penalty $200. I stood there, stunned, staring at the words like they were written in a foreign language. Unauthorized cultivation? I looked around at the rows of neat little vegetable beds my wife and I had spent the last year building, with care, heirloom tomatoes, bell peppers, basil, lettuce, even a small patch of carrots my daughter had planted herself. Nothing messy, nothing invasive, just vegetables grown in our own backyard. I heard the back door creak open behind me, and there she was, Emily, my wife, wearing gardening gloves and a sun hat, holding a watering can and humming like she always did when she was in her element. When I handed her the notice, her smile dropped instantly. She read it silently, then raised one eyebrow the way she always did when something wasn't just wrong, it was ridiculous. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. "A vegetable garden is a violation now?" Her voice was calm, but I saw the spark in her eyes, the one I'd seen only a few times before, in court when someone tried to pull a fast one on her. You see, Emily's not just any gardener. She's an environmental attorney, and she's been fighting land use battles with city councils and corporate developers for over a decade, but this time the battle had come to our backyard. I tried to brush it off. "Maybe it's a mistake," I said. "Maybe someone filed the wrong paperwork." She shook her head. This was deliberate. Then I saw it. Across the fence line, in the yard behind ours, a woman in a pastel tracksuit was standing with a clipboard, staring at us like we were criminals. Her name was Barbara Ellison, the newly elected president of the HOA. We'd barely spoken more than a polite hello before, but I'd seen her walking the neighborhood with that same clipboard every morning, inspecting things, measuring grass, eyeing mailboxes. It was only then that I realized something. We'd been targeted. Emily set the watering can down, pulled off her gloves, and said flatly, "They have no idea who they're messing with." I followed her inside, the violation notice crumpled in my fist, already knowing this wasn't going to be a quiet conversation with a neighbor. This was going to be a fight. And Emily? She doesn't lose fights. When we moved into Willow Creek Estates 2 years ago, we thought we'd found paradise. Tree-lined streets, quiet neighbors, well-kept homes, and just enough space in the backyard to finally start the garden Emily had always dreamed of. It wasn't a jungle or anything outrageous, just a few raised beds tucked neatly against the fence, a compost bin hidden behind the garage, and an herb wall she'd built from reclaimed pallets. We kept everything clean, contained, and frankly beautiful. Neighbors used to compliment us, even ask for fresh tomatoes or a sprig of rosemary. For a while everything was perfect, until Barbara Ellison showed up. She moved in 6 months ago and got herself elected HOA president within 3. No one thought much of it. She was efficient, friendly enough on the surface, always talking about community pride and upholding standards, but the clipboard came with her. Every morning, without fail, she'd walk the neighborhood with military precision, inspecting lawns, counting trash bins, photographing things no one else even noticed. The first sign of trouble came the week before the violation notice. Emily was in the yard, clipping basil, when Barbara paused by our fence. She didn't say hello. She just stared at the tomato vines like they'd personally insulted her. I remember hearing her voice float over the fence, sharp and dismissive. "Vegetable gardens don't belong in front of homes. This isn't a farm." Emily smiled politely and said, "Actually, this is the backyard." Barbara didn't smile back. A few days later, the first citation arrived, then another, and another. Apparently, our vegetable beds were now classified as unauthorized agricultural activity. Our compost bin? Improper waste storage. The rain barrel Emily had installed with a downspout diverter? Unauthorized water collection device. We were stunned. These weren't just petty complaints. They were written with legal language, citing obscure sections of HOA bylaws we had never heard of. Emily pulled out the thick HOA agreement we'd signed when we moved in and combed through it line by line. There was nothing in it about vegetables, composts, or rainwater. The original rules allowed for gardening so long as it was maintained and didn't obstruct pathways or create a nuisance. We were in full compliance. Emily started asking questions, sending emails to the HOA board, requesting clarification and a hearing. But every response came from Barbara, and every one of them was cold, firm, and dismissive. Your interpretation of the bylaws is incorrect. Your garden is not in harmony with the community aesthetic. The matter is closed. That was when Emily got suspicious. If the rules didn't prohibit gardens, why was Barbara so determined to eliminate them? She started talking to neighbors, especially the ones with anything remotely unconventional in their yards: wildflower beds, small butterfly habitats, even decorative birdhouses. One by one they confessed that they too had received violations in the past few weeks. A couple had already torn out their plants out of fear of further penalties. Something was happening, and it wasn't just about vegetables. One night, after hours of research and digging through HOA records, Emily discovered that just a month before the wave of citations began, the board had held a special meeting and voted to approve an amendment to the landscaping guidelines, one that included a vague new clause about banning food-producing plants. The problem was, the meeting hadn't been announced properly. According to HOA rules, any amendment vote required prior notice to all homeowners and a minimum number of participants. Neither condition had been met. The new rule was invalid, but that didn't stop Barbara from enforcing it. That same night, Emily found something else. The HOA had signed a maintenance contract with a landscaping company called Green Harmony Services, which now provided compliance maintenance for non-conforming properties, a vague term that included removing unauthorized vegetation and replanting HOA-approved shrubbery. And guess who owned Green Harmony? Barbara's son. When Emily told me, I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. It was a racket. Barbara had used her power to change the rules illegally, then created a problem only her family's company could solve. It was petty tyranny, plain and simple. But what made it worse was that it worked. People were scared. The HOA had the power to fine lien properties, even force foreclosure in extreme cases. Most residents didn't have the time or legal knowledge to fight back. But Emily did, and now that she knew what Barbara was really doing, she wasn't just mad, she was ready for war. Emily did not waste a second. The very next morning she hand-delivered a formal legal notice to the HOA office outlining the illegal enforcement of an unratified amendment, the undisclosed financial ties between Barbara and Green Harmony, and the clear conflict of interest in how violations were being issued and enforced. It was worded with surgical precision, the kind of letter that makes even seasoned attorneys pause before responding. She gave them 10 business days to cease all enforcement actions and release the full financial records from the past 2 years. That same afternoon, we received another violation, this time for improper alignment of our recycling bins. Emily laughed. "They're panicking," she said. She scanned it, logged it, and slid it into a growing binder now labeled Exhibit B. Then she got to work on the lawsuit. She filed the civil suit in county court under the Homeowners Protection Act and 2 state-level statutes for fraudulent governance and breach of fiduciary duty. It named not only the HOA, but Barbara personally, as well as Green Harmony Services. Within 24 hours of the suit being filed, the tone of communication from the HOA changed. The generic form letters stopped, the threats stopped. Instead, we got a carefully worded email from the HOA's legal representative requesting a private meeting. Emily declined. She had no intention of negotiating behind closed doors. If they wanted to talk, they could do it in front of a judge. Meanwhile, the news broke. A local environmental blog picked up the story. Neighborhood bans vegetable garden, gets sued by lawyer wife, and it went viral overnight. Within days, major outlets were calling. Reporters started knocking on our door. Emily declined interviews, but the narrative had already taken off. A grassroots campaign formed almost immediately, led by an urban gardening nonprofit that launched the hashtag #LetThemGrow. People from all over the country began sharing their own horror stories with HOAs, and soon our quiet suburban conflict had become a symbol of resistance against overreaching community associations. The pressure mounted, but Barbara didn't back down. She doubled down. The HOA held an emergency meeting close to homeowners and issued a statement claiming the lawsuit was baseless. that the garden ban had been legally approved, and that Emily was waging a personal vendetta against the board. That was a mistake, because Emily had video footage of that meeting, recorded by one of the board members who'd grown uneasy, and sent it to her anonymously. The video showed Barbara instructing the board to vote without informing homeowners, brushing off concerns with the phrase, "We'll deal with the fallout later." Emily turned that over to the court as evidence, and then she made her next move. She filed a discovery motion, demanding access to all HOA financials, emails, and meeting notes from the past 18 months. Under state law, as a member of the association, she was entitled to those records, regardless of the lawsuit. They tried to stonewall, claimed the documents were in storage, that the treasurer was out of town, but Emily anticipated that. She filed a second motion requesting a court order for expedited compliance due to suspected financial misconduct. The judge approved it within 72 hours. A week later, we received a flash drive via certified mail, over 300 documents in total. Emily spent 2 days going through every page. She found everything she was looking for. Double billing, landscaping invoices for work that was never done, payments to companies with no business license, multiple checks made out directly to Barbara's son, but the most damning piece was a wire transfer from the HOA's reserve fund, $15,000, to an account linked to a shell company registered under Barbara's maiden name. That, Emily said, is theft, plain and simple. She updated the lawsuit to include embezzlement and submitted the new evidence to the court. Things moved fast after that. A court date was set. The judge issued a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from issuing further fines or enforcing the garden ban. And then, in a moment that felt almost surreal, the county district attorney's office reached out. They had received multiple complaints, seen the media coverage, and were now opening a formal investigation into the HOA's finances. That night, Emily stood in our kitchen barefoot, sipping tea like it was any normal Thursday evening. "You know," she said calmly, "I used to think fighting oil companies was exhausting. Turns out suburban politics are just as dirty." I laughed, but I could feel the tension finally cracking. We were winning. And then came the retaliation. Someone slashed our garden hoses. Our mailbox was smashed with a bat. We found dog feces smeared on our doormat. None of it subtle, all of it calculated. We called the police, filed reports, installed more security cameras. Emily was unfazed. "The more desperate they get," she said, "the closer we are." And she was right, because 2 days later she received a formal letter from the HOA's attorney. Barbara Ellison was stepping down as president. Effective immediately, the board would be voting on interim leadership until the next election cycle. No apology, no admission, just silence. But it was a crack in the wall, and Emily knew exactly how to widen it. She called for a community forum. Not a formal HOA meeting, just a gathering of residents at the local park to discuss what had happened. Nearly 70 people showed up. Some brought lawn chairs, others brought cookies, and one by one they shared their own stories. Fines for bird baths, warnings about mailbox flags being too bright, threats over wind chimes. For the first time, people weren't afraid to speak, and when Emily explained exactly what the HOA had done, how it had exploited its own members, and how they had the power to reform it, the energy shifted. No one left early. They stayed, they listened, and they asked, "What do we do next?" "That," Emily said, "is the question I've been waiting for." The night of the HOA community hearing felt more like the build-up to a courtroom showdown than a neighborhood meeting. The community center was packed, every folding chair occupied, with people lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. The air was thick with tension and curiosity, the kind that buzzes just before something explodes. Barbara Ellison, freshly resigned as president but still clinging to control as a board member, sat at the front of the room in a cream blazer and a forced smile surrounded by her loyalists. Emily stood in the back, calm but focused, her binder tucked under one arm and her laptop under the other. She had declined to speak until tonight, saving everything for this moment. When the meeting was called to order, the interim president, a soft-spoken dentist named Harold Myers, opened the floor to public comments. Emily raised her hand immediately. Barbara tried to cut her off, claiming the comments needed to be related to current policy issues, not personal grievances, but Harold shook his head and nodded toward Emily. "She has the floor," he said. What happened next changed everything. Emily stepped forward, plugged in her laptop to the projector, and calmly began, "Over the past 4 months, many of us have received citations, fines, and threats based on a rule that was never legally adopted." She clicked to the next slide, a scanned copy of the amendment vote notice with no dates, no quorum signatures, and no homeowner notification. "That rule is invalid." The room went still. Then she moved to the next slide, an email exchange between Barbara and the board, instructing them to fast-track the amendment and avoid alerting residents until enforcement had already begun. Gasps echoed through the room, but Emily was just getting started. She continued with a breakdown of the HOA's financials, highlighting landscaping contracts, consulting fees, and repeated payments to Green Harmony Services, many with no accompanying invoices. The projector showed check after check, signed by Barbara, totaling over $50,000 to a company owned by her son. Several people in the audience muttered angrily. One man stood up and shouted, "That explains my bill. I never even hired them." Barbara's face paled, but she stayed seated, gripping the edge of the table. Emily advanced to the next slide, a copy of the wire transfer from HOA reserve funds to an account linked to a shell company under Barbara's maiden name. "That," she said clearly, "is misappropriation of funds." And it doesn't stop there. She then pulled up a map of the neighborhood, showing a heat map of violation notices issued over the past 6 months. Nearly 70% of them were concentrated on just 4 streets, none of which included Barbara's home or those of her allies. It was targeted enforcement. Selective, punitive, deliberate. The room began to rumble with outrage. Then Emily dropped the final bombshell, a video recording, anonymous but verified, of Barbara coaching a Green Harmony contractor on how to justify citations based on aesthetics rather than actual rule violations. "Just say it looks messy," she said in the clip. "That gets them every time." The room exploded. People stood up, shouting, demanding answers. Barbara tried to speak, but the noise drowned her out. Someone yelled, "We want a vote." Another added, "She stole from us." The interim president stood, holding up his hands for calm. "According to HOA bylaws," he said, "if 30% of members present call for an emergency vote of no confidence, we are required to hold it immediately." Nearly every hand in the room shot up. The vote was counted, tallied, and confirmed. The result? Over 90% of those present voted to remove Barbara, and the remaining board members tied to the misconduct. A stunned silence followed as Barbara slowly rose from her seat. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "I built this neighborhood. Everything I did for its future." No one clapped. No one thanked her. She walked out of the room alone. As the doors closed behind her, someone in the back started clapping, slow, deliberate. Then more joined in. Applause filled the room, not in celebration of a takedown, but in relief, in justice, in a new beginning. Emily turned to me, exhausted but smiling. "It's not over yet," she whispered. "But tonight we turn the tide." The days following the vote felt like the aftermath of a storm. Quiet at first, then full of the sounds of rebuilding. Barbara officially resigned from all HOA duties the next morning and put her house up for sale within the week. A moving truck showed up one rainy afternoon, and by nightfall she was gone without so much as a goodbye. Rumors swirled about legal charges, frozen accounts, and ongoing investigations, but Emily stayed focused. She submitted the final round of evidence to the district attorney's office, and 2 weeks later we got confirmation. An official audit of the HOA was underway, and Barbara was being investigated for financial misconduct. But the real change came not from the courthouse, but from within the neighborhood. A new election was held, and this time it wasn't decided by whispers or manipulation. People stepped up. Retirees, teachers, young couples, folks who had once been afraid to speak but now felt empowered. Harold Myers was elected president. Miss Daniels from the end of the street became treasurer, and 3 new board members were sworn in, each one committed to transparency and fairness. One of the first things they did was strike down the illegal garden amendment and pass a new resolution affirming every homeowner's right to cultivate personal gardens, as long as they were maintained and respectful of space. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Our backyard, once a symbol of defiance, was now just a garden again. Tomatoes ripened on the vine, basil grew thick and fragrant, and the carrots my daughter had planted finally reached harvest. But it wasn't just our yard. All over Willow Creek, new life sprouted. Neighbors started planting again, raised beds, trellises, even small fruit trees. Emily helped organize a seed exchange, and every Saturday people came by with trowels and clippings and baskets of produce to share. The fences that had once divided us now had gates. Conversations replaced complaints. Laughter replaced silence, and for the first time in a long while, the HOA meetings were full, not with angry voices, but with engaged residents ready to build something better. Emily became an unofficial advisor to the new board, helping them draft clearer, simpler bylaws that protected both property values and personal freedom. Her lawsuit, though no longer needed in court, remained open as a civil case to ensure accountability and restitution for those who had paid fines under Barbara's rule. The funds recovered were put into a new community improvement fund, this time managed by the entire board, with open ledgers for everyone to see. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and the sky turned soft with pink and orange, Emily and I sat on the back porch watching our daughter water the garden. A group of kids zipped by on bikes, their laughter echoing through the street. Across the yard, our neighbor, Mrs. Patel, waved from her own little herb patch, her once banned mint now flourishing. "You realize," I said, "if they had never tried to stop you from planting tomatoes, none of this would have happened." Emily smiled, a tired but satisfied kind of smile. "Sometimes," she said, "it takes someone trying to pull out the roots to show you how deep they really go." We sat there in silence for a while, letting it all sink in, the fight, the fear, the resilience, and the justice. And just before we went inside for the night, I looked around one last time. The fences were still there, but now they were covered in vines, and not a single violation notice in sight. The story you just read isn't just about a garden, it's about power, resilience, and the importance of knowing your rights. In many American neighborhoods today, HOAs wield incredible influence over homeowners' lives. While they can help maintain property values and community standards, unchecked power can easily lead to abuse. What happened in Willow Creek could happen anywhere. That's why stories like this matter, because they remind us that ordinary people can challenge systems that overstep their bounds. Here are a few lessons to take with you. Read what you sign, whether it's a lease, HOA agreement, or service contract. Always understand the rules. Hidden clauses can give others more power over your life than you realize. Know your rights. Many states have laws protecting homeowners from HOA overreach. Learn about your local Homeowners Protection Acts, transparency laws, and what your HOA can and can't do. Documentation is everything. If you ever feel you're being unfairly targeted, save every notice, take photos, and record interactions when possible. Paper trails are powerful. Community is stronger than fear. Most HOA abuse thrives on isolation and silence. When neighbors unite, share stories, and support each other, change becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Stand up, even if it's uncomfortable. Doing the right thing won't always be easy or popular, but as this story shows, one person willing to push back can spark a wave of transformation. We live in a time when many feel disconnected from local power structures, but the truth is, some of the most meaningful change starts right on our streets, behind our fences, and within our own communities. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to stand up to unfair rules or leadership in your neighborhood or workplace? How did it go, and what would you do differently now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a real conversation going, because your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear.